Great to be with you today. My name is Jeff Huber. I'm lead pastor here at Summit Church, and it is the 29th of April at 9 in the morning, and we're doing our daily devotional time. I'll be continuing doing this on Thursdays, but you may have seen that we're going to shorten things up or have just a few days starting next week in May as we move into the summer. You probably also have seen that we've had some staff changes. And all of them are ones that are not shocking or surprising, and it's part of the nature of life to have things shift and move. And I've been doing this for 30 years now as a pastor and seen lots of folks pursuing their calling in different ways, and we're excited. This was the last day today for both Morgan and Aaron on our staff. Morgan's been here for a couple of years, and she really is feeling called to work really solely with kids and younger kids in particular, and moving to a larger area, a larger city. So that's going to be down in Arizona, and she leaves this week. And we've been blessed by her. She has done one of our devotions regularly, and in order to kind of in this in between time, we're going to do just Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday starting next week. So there'll be no Monday devotional. And part of that's because Celia, who's been with us for 3 years and is going to continue to be with us, need to take a leave of absence. And I just invite you to be in prayer for her. We often invite you to put prayer requests on, if you're on YouTube or on Facebook in particular, we invite you to do that now. But one of the persons we're praying for is Celia. She had to go back. Her mother is on hospice now, has been struggling with cancer for several years and really in her final kind of leg of that journey. So Celia needs to be with her and her family, and she'll be off for a couple of months as she spends time with them. So she's been doing Mondays, so we're going to shift some things around, and Jake and Rob will do Tuesdays, I think. That's where Morgan's been. And then Wednesday will still be Worship Wednesday with Eli, and then I'll do Thursdays. And we'll have some folks subbing in because we'll have vacations and stuff happening this year. So anyway, we're excited to still be with you 3 days a week starting next week. And today it's great to be with you. Today also is Aaron's last day. Aaron's been our Three Springs campus pastor, and really he's feeling called to some more specific kind of ministry, reaching people outside the church, and we're excited for him and what that holds for him. And then Karen is retiring. She hasn't been doing one of our meditation moments, but we're excited for her. She's been here for 5+ years, and her kids are both moved back into Durango. She's got a grandkid for the first time, and just like many people, I think, wanting and ready to start kind of this next phase. And she'll still be here in town, and I'm sure we'll still see her around at times. But we're excited for all those people and all those changes. And I just ask you to pray for the church. And I always remind people it's going to be okay. God's going to get us through this. And today in particular, and this week, as we're reading the Sermon on the Mount, the text that we're focusing on about salt and light are really appropriate because in times of, we live in a season where there's changes and things are happening in the world that are not what we always expect. And in the middle of that, we're called to be salt and light, even in the midst of times that feel maybe turbulent or uneasy. And we've seen a lot of that in our culture over the last couple of years with the pandemic and elections. And then there's the, it seems like we see more and more acts of violence. There's racial tensions and issues and all these things. And one of the questions Jesus asks of us is, how can we be salt and light in these situations? So today we're going to read actually from John's gospel, because John begins his gospel talking about what light means. And so at the very beginning, we read these words, in the beginning, the word already existed. So that's the idea that God has been around forever, and God is embodied in this idea of the word is capitalized in John's gospel at this very beginning, what we call the prologue. The word was with God, and the word was God. So there's this idea these things are synonymous, that the word and God are together, and they've been around since the beginning of times and all of creation. God existed the word existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through that word, and nothing was created except through him. And really, John is equating the word now with Jesus as the one who comes in the flesh. The word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. So here's the idea that Jesus not only is going to talk about how we are the light, but then, he'll say things like, where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there. And the idea is that then we become that light. Jesus is the light, and we become that light. The light shines in the darkness, we read in verse 5 of John's gospel in the first chapter, and the darkness can never extinguish it. So there's this powerful idea in John's gospel that I just love and appreciate, that is such an important part of our faith, but we sometimes kind of miss, I think, because we don't recognize that this idea of light applies not just to Jesus, but to us and to how we interact with all of creation. And Jesus goes on, and in the Sermon on the Mount, as we learned last week, Aaron did a great job of talking about salt and light and how we are called to be the light, salt and light of the earth, that we're meant to bring light. And so one of the questions I think this passage just kind of asks of us in today's world is, how do we experience the light of Christ in a way that we then can reflect that to the world? I mean, we say in this church we want to be the presence of Jesus Christ to the world. And what that means is being light. And you know what's easy? Here's what I was thinking about with this. It's easy when you read the news, websites, whatever you do to kind of stay connected to the world, to get negative, right? And to go down this road of just kind of beating ourselves up and thinking, thoughts that sometimes can take us down rabbit holes where we feel depressed or discouraged or anxiety or fearful. Yesterday, our staff did some great time with a wonderful woman who works with people around and staffs here. I mean, she's kind of is a staff developer, and we had a great time with her. She used this acronym that maybe you've heard before, but maybe you haven't. But it starts with T for thoughts, and then moves down to R or F for feelings, and then actions is A, and then results. And the idea is this, that things happen to us and we think about them. And then our thoughts lead to these feelings we have about whatever happened. And then the action follows that feeling. We usually respond because of the feeling. And then there's results that come out of it. And, there's a lot of different ways you can look at this in your own personal life, in your life at work, in your life at the church. But let's just take one example that we read the latest thing that happens on, this latest act of violence. We read about an act of violence, all right? And we start thinking, oh, the world is falling apart, even though none of that's happening around us. Immediately the world's falling apart. Or we read about, some political thing, oh, that this is, everything's falling apart, and we think about it. So then our feelings follow, and we become anxious, fearful. We become all worked up, and then we take action by, like, maybe saying things to people that cause them to be fearful or anxious, or having negative attitude at work or with our family or with our friends or whatever it is. And the results are this spiral kind of happens, and people feel discouraged, or even around us. And here's what I think Jesus is doing when he says he wants us to be salt and light, and that is to think about the world differently. To, instead of thinking about the world and looking at it and seeing maybe how it is the world's falling apart or how these bad things might be happening, to look at the world and go, wow, we can choose to be salt and light. Even when things are dark, even when things are hard, we can choose to react differently and think differently. And when we think differently, we start to have different feelings, and we start to have more hope. Once again, we recognize and we think, okay, Jesus is the light of the world. This act of violence I just read about, or this political thing that I saw, or whatever it is, that doesn't define who you are. It doesn't define who I am. That's not who we are. We are people of faith. We're people of faith, and we're meant to receive that light, if you will, from Christ, and help us begin to think differently about what we see and say, oh, instead of seeing the world all through these, lenses where everything is horrible and falling apart, instead we maybe notice and we see how it is there are little acts of grace and love and mercy. Bob Goff is a writer that a lot of you have read. He's got a great book called Everything Always Love Does. He's got a new devotional book about, I highly recommend. And one of the things I love that he does is he looks at the world differently because of his relationship with Jesus as the light. And so instead of seeing the glass as half empty, he sees it as half full, because Jesus came to fill our cup. We might have life and life to the full. Even when we have difficult things happening in our own life, whether it's a health crisis or something going on with, I was visiting recently with someone who has a loved one that's dealing with addiction. And my heart just went out to them. And, in those moments, it's hard. I've been through that. Trust me, it's hard to see the light. But even in those moments, God invites us to calm, to settle, and to focus on Him as the light. And then we can be the light to the world. Because then we can start to see the world differently and say, in the middle of that act of violence or that, here, and what I find interesting, whenever we read about some horrible story, there always is another thing going on underneath. There are people reacting differently. There are people behaving differently. There are people, even in those moments, being light and being the presence of something more. And so here's what I'd like to encourage you to do today and throughout the week is think about this idea of salt and light. Whenever you see something that starts taking you down a negative rabbit hole, I encourage you to stop and take a step back and say and ask instead, where do I see Jesus in this? And how might Jesus be inviting me to respond and to think differently? And see if that doesn't bring about some different feelings. Those it starts with these thoughts, and see if it doesn't lead to some different feelings that then can lead to some different actions and some different results in our lives. And we can take this to a very personal level. All right. We were just talking about reading something, but let's say you you get up and you notice the kitchen is dirty and there's stuff in there's dirty dishes, and you can think, oh, my family never cleans up, or my husband or my wife or my kids or whatever it is, and we can do that if we want, or we can look at the dirty dishes and think, well, I'm grateful we had food to eat on those plates. I'm grateful that we have the resources to have plates, to have food, to have a kitchen that we can keep clean, and that leads to feelings of appreciation and thankfulness, and maybe even leads us to then react differently, and maybe we are like, oh, I'll just clean it up, or hey, maybe invite your spouse or your child, whoever it is, to clean it up with you, or you make it into a family activity, and you have action, and you have different results, right? The different result is that you have more closeness in those important relationships. You see, this can happen, and we can be the light in our homes, in our workplaces. We have an employee or a coworker that drives us crazy because they do this thing or that thing, that we don't like. We can focus on that. We can think about that all the time, or we can be grateful we have a job. We can be grateful that we get to work with people. We can maybe look for something we appreciate about them, and we start to feel, something differently, and then we act differently towards them, and maybe reach out. Maybe we get to be the light to them. You see, here's what Jesus is saying to us. We don't always get to choose what happens to us or what happens in the world around us. We don't. Things happen. Things happen. What we do get to do is choose how to respond. We get to choose if we're going to be salt and light, even in a difficult situation. I want you to notice that the only way to be salt and light is to know that, and the only reason we need salt and light is because sometimes the world is dark and there are hard things. And Jesus, I think in those moments in particular, asks us to be the light of the world, to be the salt, to bring flavor into a place where maybe there's nothingness, if you will. So, here are the questions that we ask on our today as you're reading through, if you're using the meditation moments on our website. But, on a personal level, who has been a light in your life? So maybe reflect on that and think, boy, who has brought light into my life? Who's helped to focus on some things that I need to see or to hear? And then, what have you learned about living as a channel of God's light from their example? Maybe look at someone else and say, what have I learned from that? And who do you know in the world today, or what situation today can you bring that light of Christ into? I'd like you to pray about that as we end our time together today. Pray about where is there a place God is calling you and I to be? You see, this is a very personal thing Jesus says in this. He says, you, me, we are the light of the world. He doesn't say that person over there. He says, you, the disciples, those people listening, all those who are hearing the sermon. The Sermon on the Mount is timeless because in every epoch, at every time, in every moment, you and I are invited to be the light of the world. Is it hard sometimes? Yeah, of course it is. Sometimes we don't feel like being that, but that's where we're asked to rethink and then maybe brings different feelings into our hearts. And by the way, this is where also I recognize sometimes I can't do it on my own. And so we invite Jesus to come in. Jesus, help me think about this differently. Help me to see light and salt in places where I'm invited to bring those things into the world. And then maybe we begin to, here's what I guarantee you. If you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is do your meditation moments or read this scripture like from John 1 or we're going to read Psalm 27 in a minute, maybe read that Psalm. You read it changes how you think about though. It changes everything the rest of your day. I know it does for me. And so I want to encourage you to do that. And what's one specific step you can take today to bring light and life into maybe a place where there's darkness, and do it. Invite Jesus to give you that power and strength to do it. If you feel like I don't have the strength, okay, ask Jesus to do that, to help do that with you. So that's what I really hope for you today, and I hope you'll think about how you might do that. So I always like to end with the Psalms, and so we're going to come to Psalm 27 here in a minute. So if you want to get that out, you can. It's one of my favorite Psalms. It talks about light and salvation and what it means. And this is often, this Psalm was in the early church thought to be pointing towards Jesus too. And so it's a powerful one to read, especially if you think about John 1 and this idea of salt and light and the Sermon on the Mount. Before we do that, let me just remind you that you don't need to sign up for worship. Right now, we are worshiping at 5:30 on Saturday night and 9 a.m. Sunday morning. We have Summit Kids during both of those. Even with Celia gone, we have Ashley Termont, who's been stepping in. She's our new assistant director in that area, and she's doing a great job. And she needs your support, by the way, love and prayers. So pray for her. And that's happening. So you can just come, and then when you come in, we just ask you to let us know you're here. And that way, in case we need to do any tracing, right now, we haven't had any outbreaks here. Everybody's been great about wearing a mask. We had great, where our attendance is creeping back up because people are feeling, I think, better about coming. So we just hope you'll join us in person if you can. But we're online at those times too. Still join us online or throughout the rest of the week. The next week, we'll also have this weekend, our traditional service will be streamed at 11. It won't be live this week. In 2 weeks, however, we will get together for our traditional service live, and we'll also stream that. And for the first time, and with some folks who want to do that, and we'll be talking about how, what the traditional service, how we'll continue to do that, what it will look like moving into the summer. Our worship staff in particular has not been always available for our traditional worship staff. So that's the reason we've been kind of holding back, and a lot of folks are not quite ready for that. So we're in that we're kind of starting to open things up. We have small groups meeting again in the church, or we have other things happening. So we're really glad to connect with you. And of course, we still are doing everything online. So with that said, I'd like us to read and hear this Psalm 27, knowing that we're called to be the light in person, online, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in our homes. And this psalm really speaks to that, and how it is we come by that light. It's not something we generate on our own. It's a gift that's given to us from God. So hear these words. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Just breathe that in right now. Take a deep breath. The Lord is my light and my salvation. So why should I be afraid? This psalm is meant to dispel that fear that sometimes can creep in when we get to reading other stuff. The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger. So why should I tremble? Just breathe that in. When evil people come to devour me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army might surround me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I'm attacked, I will remain confident. The one thing I ask the Lord, the one thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections, meditating in God's temple. And just breathe that idea that we're meant to think about, meditate upon, spend time with God in God's holy places in those holy moments like this. For God will conceal me when the trouble comes. God will hide me in his sanctuary. God will place me out of reach on a high rock. Then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. And in his sanctuary, I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. We're going to offer ourselves and give ourselves even when life seems challenging and things are surrounding us, because God is our light and our salvation. And I love these words from verse 7. Hear me as I pray, O Lord. Be merciful, answer me. My heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. My heart responds, Lord, I am coming. Would you say that with me right now, wherever you are? Lord, I am coming. Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper, God. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. God is our heavenly parent. Teach me how to live, O Lord. Lead me along the right path, for my enemies are waiting for me. Do not let me fall into their hands. They accuse me of things I've never done. With every breath, they threaten me with violence. Yet I am confident. In other words, to be confident means to think upon. I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living. And then just say these words after me. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. I invite you to breathe in that idea of waiting patiently on God, of knowing that God is the one who walks with us, who encourages us. The Lord is our light, and that's our salvation. Would you carry that with you? Would you repeat that throughout the day? That's a great verse to just say throughout today. The Lord is the light and my salvation. Our scripture memory verse is this, and I've given you verses from the Message version of the Bible, but from Mark 5, it's you're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. You see, when we start to think about God being present, we start thinking about the world differently, and then our feelings are of God's light and warmth filling us, and we feel God's presence. When that happens, we begin to act differently. God is not a secret to be kept, and we begin to share that truth. And then the results are we are salt and light to the earth. This is how we become salt and light. We think differently because we're people of faith. We feel God's presence and we feel God's warmth, and we feel God inside of us. And then we act differently. And the result is being salt and light. That's my hope and prayer for you this week and throughout the week and throughout this spring, summer, as we begin to reopen, more and more, that we would be salt and light together. So I share with you a lot today. Thank you so much. Many of you have been so supportive, sent nice supportive emails during times of transition like this with our staff having some changes. But it's going to be okay. We're going to be salt and light. And we're going to think here. And here's once again, we can think about this like, oh no, people are leaving or people are moving, or we can think about it this way: God will be God. And God will be with the persons who are leaving because they're following their calling, and God is going to bring us something new. And God, I always believe our best days as a church, as the body of Christ, are always ahead of us. And that means we can be the light and the salt of the earth. I pray you will grab onto that, hold onto that individually and for us as a church. And that as we gather for worship this weekend, we're going to continue to talk about authentic faith. And how do we have faith that's real? That's what Jesus is really talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. That's a powerful thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing you this weekend. Once again, blessings to you. And if you would bow your head and let's pray together. God, thank you. Thank you that you have met us here in this place, that you meet us whenever we read the scriptures, whenever we turn our hearts to you. God, be with us as we seek to serve and follow you, and help us to know you. Help us to think about these things, to think upon, one of the things that Paul says, to think upon these things that are beautiful, that are lovely, that are a part of your creation. God, help us to think on you, and may that light then fill us, so that we might change how we're feeling, even in those difficult moments, and that we might act differently. We might be the salt and the light of the earth. God, thank you for this chance to do that. God, we lifted up prayers today. Many of those have been shared, online. And so, God, I pray for all those. And God, we invite you to change us, to change our hearts, so we might be salt and light in the world. These things we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus. The people of God said, wherever they are, Amen. Well, thanks again for joining us today. I'll be with you next Thursday. Looking forward to that. Once again, next week, just Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday devotionals, but they'll be posted online as soon as they're done. And if you like our page on Facebook or sign up to get notifications, you'll know not only when we're live, but you'll also get that regularly, a reminder to check in on that daily devotional. So thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Go in peace and serve God in all that you do, being light and salt.